All right, so for complex images like this, we're going to use the foreground select tool. So I'm going to go again to this menu, long press, and then select foreground select. So this tool is kind of similar, slightly similar to, if you've done Photoshop, the select and mask interface, or what was earlier known as the refine edge tool, because that's exactly what it does. You make a rough selection and then you get two stages of refinement here. Okay, so let's see how this works. So the moment I select this tool, okay, you'll notice that I automatically just look at the cursor. It's the free select tool, like the lasso or the free select tool, right? So it just turns into that the moment you do that. Okay, we're also going to hit this first tab, because remember I had opened the undo history before. This by default will reflect. If it's not, then just hit that first icon and you're going to see the properties of the tool that you're using. This is important. Whenever you know that you're going to be working on stuff like complex hair like this, always make sure feather edges is selected here, because sometimes by default it's not. So just select feather edges, because it's just going to make those edges slightly softer. Okay, you can play around with the radius also. It's okay right now if we just leave things at the default. The draw mode, we're going to stick to foreground. So you can either refine the foreground, that means your subject, or the background. In this case, we are going to be working on the foreground. That's usually much more intuitive. Just think of it this way. So we let the default be there, which is the foreground. That means we're going to be selecting her and not the background, something that we did last time. Okay, so things can change a bit, but this tool works better by selecting the subject. Then stroke width is going to come into play slightly later on. Okay, that's the second part of refinement. We're first going to go through the first part or the first stage of refinement. So we'll talk about this later. Then is your preview mode. This is also going to come in the second part. So I'll talk about that, what this color is and all these things. Engine, you got two options, matting global, matting 11. Now just think of it like this. These are two people or two things or two ways, not ways exactly, two algorithms. I think algorithm is the correct way of using this tool and finally getting the selection. Our main job is to what? Is to get the correct selection, right? So think of it like this. We have two algorithms and competing algorithms. Now, which one works better? Usually people say this one, the second one, the matting 11 results in more accurate selections. I'm going to be using matting global simply because on my computer, when I use matting 11, GIMP crashes always. So I've never really been able to use matting 11 properly. And to be frank, I've not noticed too much of a difference. You can try both later on once you know how to use this tool. And because main thing is how to use this tool. And then you can try on both, whichever results better. And if GIMP doesn't crash for you, then you can use either one, whichever you like. Because my GIMP still crashes, I'm going to select global. Okay, and you can leave this last option as default. So now let's start the process. So how the whole process works is, remember, two stages of refinement. First one is very easy. All you have to tell GIMP is, or GIMP is asking you like this, Kush, this is the first stage. Tell me just in a very rough way, what is the foreground? That means what is the subject and what is the background? So just draw something near your subject so that I know that, yes, this is the subject. So this is like a very rough first stage of refinement. So we say, okay, remember that's why it's given us this free select tool by default. So we say, okay, for this first stage, just roughly draw a selection around your subject. Okay, you can be slightly sloppy at this stage, doesn't matter, but still try to be around the subject. Okay, because this is slightly important. You don't want to give too much of a gap also. So close this, and I'm going to now just see what happens when I hit enter. So now you might, by the way, be seeing this in blue, because that's what usually is the default. Doesn't matter. You can set any color. The color is not that important, okay? But since you might be seeing blue, I don't want to confuse you. That's why I just changed this black to blue. Now, what you're seeing here is GIMP is again saying, okay, anything that is dark blue Kush here is, I'm guessing this is your thing that you don't want. This is not your foreground. This is the background. And anything with this lighter shade, because you've drawn this, now I'm guessing that this is important for you, Kush. So I say, yes, that's right. So our first stage is done. That at least GIMP knows what is slightly important to us. But the problem is this. Now the next question that GIMP is asking us is, but you know what? I still see a lot of gaps. So are these gaps important to you? Now, what is this gap? is still the background, right? It's not important to us. This is where the second stage of refinement comes in, where we tell GIMP exactly what is important to us, which is this woman. So we need to now select only this woman and not have these background pixels. So this is not a rough stage now. This is the more accurate stage which is going to start. And can you see, the moment I hit enter and we got these blue tinted things, my cursor also changed to a brush. Just notice, now it's not the free select tool anymore. It changed to a brush, right? Because now is the time for this second stage. We need to start painting over things which are important to us. So we have to avoid the background and we only have to paint not everywhere on this woman, but at least most of it. So where GIMP is just asking us, you know what, just paint at least on most of what is important to you, okay? So we say, okay, we'll do that. And when I start painting, initially it's just going to take whatever foreground color is set. Like, remember from our last edit, we had just selected green because we were replacing that background. That doesn't matter, okay? The color doesn't matter, but just see what happens when I start painting. I usually like to increase the stroke width here because that is going to just make things easy, because right now it's too small, so we'll have to like paint a lot on this woman. So let me just increase the size here like this, okay? So now you're going to just see green color come here. Don't worry about the color. It's not important, okay? It's just taking the foreground color. But important thing is to cover with this most of this subject, okay? This is a part where you have to be patient. The better you do here, because a lot of people, what they do is they just paint like in a zigzag way or something like that, and where they don't really paint properly, okay? Now, I'm not saying you go on the edges because it's tough to do that, but at least try your best to cover most of it. The better job you do here, what's going to happen in the next stage is going to give you an output as a selection. And the better job you do here, the more accurate the selection is going to be, because the more sampling data you have provided. You're basically right now at this stage, you're providing the sample of what you want, which is the subject, the pixels of what you want the woman here, okay? So go here. Even if you don't cover this much, you still get a pretty okay selection, but it's just that it results in a much better output if you just spend more time, okay? Don't touch the background at this stage. This is an important stage. Now, if I leave this, you can leave it anytime. It's not an issue. You'll just see this turn into like another thing now. So we've got 3. The dark blue is telling GIMP totally avoid. The second stage in between is what happened at the first stage. We gave a rough selection. And the clear part that you're seeing, this is what GIMP is going to use to distinguish. Okay? So this should be important. So even I would like to give some of its hand because we've not painted here. So I'm just going to reduce the stroke width. Okay. What I was saying was a lot of people just go like this, because ultimately what you're doing is you want to cover most of the pixels which this person has, right? And even that does the job, but I've just seen to be a bit patient to properly fill the areas up is slightly better, even though it just takes a bit of more time, right? But it's not too bad also. Something like this is fine. We'll also give, because this is going to be the tough part, right? For GIMP to select this here. So we're going to give as much as possible without touching those gaps, because in the gaps is the background color. So yeah, something like this should be fine. Now this much I feel is fine. If you, like I said, if you can zoom in like this, even get these parts, be careful by, let's say, taking the stroke width and let's say even reducing it further. Let's give it some at least, okay? So because we know that these are the problem areas, right? So even give it these pixels, a bit of it. Okay. But like I said, like I made a bit of a mistake here, right? So anytime you make a mistake, what you can do is instead of draw foreground, select draw background, and that's going to just take away from that. So we are saying, okay, don't select this, okay? I'm actually just going to undo everything here. Probably for this, I'll just reduce the stroke width even more and just maybe paint. To be frank, I don't know how much of a difference this is going to make, but at least it can't hurt us if you've not gone. Again, I'll have to undo it because I completely forgot to change this. So make sure draw foreground is selected because running this on the hair. Okay? Things like this really make you appreciate Photoshop more. Okay, there it's, I want to say, by the way, even in Photoshop, this is a tough selection. It's not like you're just going to get straight away a perfect result even in Photoshop. This is a tough selection because of the hair, okay? So let's say, yeah, fine, this much is okay. I'm just gonna go back to the view level. And now what you can do is before you hit select, because the moment you hit select, the final job is done. You're gonna get your final output after its algorithm goes and computes everything, okay? But before that, what I like to do is this option is pretty handy. It says preview mask. So this is like, you're just getting a preview of what's gonna happen ultimately before you get the final selection, because then you can still make changes if you're not happy with it. So if I hit preview mask, it is gonna start computing. And by the way, this is the stage where if I right now had matting 11 selected, okay, it would have crashed when this thing comes, computing alpha of unknown pixels. So it's just the software doing its own algorithm and calculation, but it's still not going to be the final result. We're just seeing and asking for a preview right now. So let's just wait for this. And you can see this is showing us the selection. Now you're not seeing any marching ants, but it is, remember this background has changed now. It is this blue. Whatever color you select here, that is going to change here and you'll be able to get a decent preview. And you can see, right, this selection looks pretty good. So let's say just like in the last image, we wanted it to be green. So I can get this preview even on green so that I know that ultimately when I do make that layer, I kind of already have seen the result here. So let's just select green from here. You can see it's not going to look bad on green. Also, this is a pretty good selection, right? So now that I'm happy with it, I can hit select. Now it's going to give you selections. So now if we zoom in, it's not going to be perfect. Okay, even in Photoshop, getting things like this is not easy. Okay, but you can see at least it's got a lot of it, right? Which fuzzy select and all these things, it'll be just too tough to do with that. Okay. Any areas which need a bit of refinement right now, you still have your selection, so you can, sometimes just do it manually. So go to the, just like we did last time, add to the current selection. Yeah. And maybe a bit here. I'm not trying to be too perfect because sometimes you just need to zoom in and do things. Okay, I'm just slightly being fast here. But like even I would probably zoom in and work on this. A main job is I'm just more worried about the complex edges because this is something you just get used to, okay? And I think this looks pretty good. But the real test will come when we'll actually put it on the main layer, okay? So, and try probably even with different backgrounds because sometimes in these soft edges, it just leaves a halo and we don't want that halo effect to come. So we're gonna test this out. Now, for such complex images, I don't just like to delete the background, okay? Because what I like to do is I want to preserve this selection, and so we're going to be non-destructive about it. We're going to be using a layer mask. So I'm just going to go to this part with the selection active. I'm going to hit the layer mask option, and then initialize layer mask to selection. So it's going to use the selection to create the layer mask. And I say add. And you can see it's deleted, but this time, because we've got the layer mask, we can activate this selection anytime that we want and make changes to it if required. So we can also, we're seeing a preview of this. Let's also, right now, we can get rid of the marching ants again. So Control Command Shift A. And my job is pretty much done. And right now I can just right click on this layer mask, okay? So make sure this is highlighted, the layer mask. I often like to do is just right click and select this option which says show layer mask. Because you are still going to notice some imperfections, which to be frank, even if you don't correct, unless and until you're going to make a big printout of this after you change the layer to some other color, the background, it's okay. If you just want to use it for social media, web purpose, even this is fine because you saw it was looking okay, right? But let's say you want this to be perfect, right? So what we're going to do is, because you can see like some grayish areas are coming, there's going to be a bit of halo here. So let's test this. We're going to again right click and let's remove this because right now it looks okay. But the real test always comes when you actually put the layer, right? So we're going to go here and create a new layer. Let's fill it with the same color that we did for the last image. So we're going to say fill with foreground color and let's pull this down. And now this time you can see that, yes, we can see a bit of the halo. If I zoom in, you can also see some imperfections here, right? Now there's a very easy way to correct this. How we're going to correct this is using this layer mask itself. So if I again go back to this, if I say show layer mask, it's actually showing us the black and white. Remember, black conceals, white reveals, okay? Just slightly zoom out. We just need to correct these areas. So just think of it like this. If these grayish areas, if we could paint them black, and in an opposite way, if these little grayish areas inside the white parts, if we could paint them white, that would make our selection perfect. So isn't it as easy as taking a paintbrush, changing the foreground color to black, and then, let's say, let me reduce the size of this brush. If I do this, turn the opacity all the way to 100, and if I start on this layer mask with black color, start painting black, that should do the job, right? You can get rid of these black areas, but there's going to be one issue. You'll have to be very careful around the edges, because if I do this, then I lose my selection, because remember, anything that is white is the selection. So I'm just going to hit Control Z, Command Z to undo this. So how do you do this without being too careful? Because we already spent so much time now. We don't want to slowly go through this, though you can, but it's just going to be an inefficient process. So what you can do here is you can select a mode. So you can change the mode of this paintbrush. Right now, by default, it's set to normal. But if I go here and if I select the overlay mode, what this does is overlay mode means when you paint, it's only going to work on areas which are grayish. Okay, I don't want to get into the technicality of it. It's got to do something with less than or more than 50% gray. I don't want to get into, I don't like to teach that way. It's just going to work on areas that are grayish. So let's say if I was to use a black paintbrush now, and I'm saying that on the overlay mode is only going to work on the grayish areas, then that means it's going to avoid the white areas, right? Because white is not gray. So right now, if I take black, it's just going to darken or make these areas black, because these are the grayish areas. So just see. But I can easily now avoid touching, even if I touch, like go inside, as long as I'm on white, it's not going to affect. Okay? This makes it really, really easy. In fact, so easy that I can zoom out, make my brush bigger, and just do this fast, clean this up. It's only going to work on those grayish parts, and this is going to really make your selection cleaner. That's what it does, okay? If it's important to you, because usually for social media images, what people usually do is they select a background color which is more compatible and hides the flaws. That's one way of getting around it. But if you need to be too careful, you can. Now, can you see it also affected the grayish areas inside? So it doesn't know what's inside or outside. It's just going to not work on white. But if there's a gray area inside the selection, it's going to work on that. But don't worry, because we're going to do the same thing with the white brush. We're going to start painting on the overlay mode, and it's only going to work because we're going to only do it inside the white areas. It's only going to work on the gray areas inside the white areas, but we'll select the color as white. So instead of right now, how it's turning these gray areas into black, we can also do the opposite, turn them into white using a white color brush. Right now, let's just quickly get rid of this. And we're going to be using the same strategy, by the way, to get rid of that halo. Okay? It's just that one thing will change, which is going to be a very small change. Just talk about that. But you can see, right, instantly now, this looks much more cleaner. And now, finally, we can select white. By the way, if you just want to switch between these two, you get that shortcut, okay? You can hit X and it switches, because oftentimes you might need to do that. But in this case, it's okay. So now I've selected white. And if I was to zoom in, you see, it does the same thing here now. We're making these selections. Basically, we're adding to the selection and making it much more neater, okay? So any areas on the sides, and quickly correct this. You can see here. So this is much better looking selection. Oops, not this. So here, can you see? A bit of it is left, so I need to switch to black. So I hit X, it turns to black. And that's job done. So this looks much more cleaner. If I was to now hide this show layer mask option, can you see? A bit of those issues are there. If you still notice these issues, then no problem. You can, by the way, you don't need to always show the mask. You can even work without showing the mask. It's going to do the same thing. So remember, this is going to help us where if we select this to white and fill this up, right? Because we need to, it's doing the same thing. It's just that this time we're not seeing the mask. We're actually seeing the image. Sometimes that can be helpful, especially in areas like this. If I zoom out slightly, remember this halo is causing us a problem. Especially in this case, I actually like to see the image and work, not show the layer mask itself. And here what you need to do is, so we need to activate black again. And what I like to do here is, because you need to be a bit soft, right? So I like to do two things. One is just right here, you're going to see this hardness option. So usually if it's, this is how hard the edges are of the brush. So I like to set the hardness to 0. Okay, if it's not already set the hardness to 0, because we're going to be just slightly touching these parts. This time we're not going to be going in a full 100% opacity. And you're going to reduce the opacity. We're just basically going to run our brush a few times just to get rid of this halo. Because if you think of it, this is like a very light whitish color which we just need to get rid of. So again, we will use the same overlay strategy. I can make the brush size a bit bigger. So this much is fine. And just maybe 1 or 2 strokes. That's it. Not more than that. So like this. Can you see? Because if you do too much, can you see it also eats away from the selection? So you'll have to just be careful slightly. Okay. This. If you lose a bit of volume, it's okay as long as the halo goes. Okay. Here. All right. Same way, if you feel you've slightly gone overboard, you can always switch back to white and just add more volume to this. But now if you slightly zoom out, I think this is a pretty good selection, right? Some mistakes here, probably I would switch this to white, add back a bit of volume on this side. But I think overall, I think this selection looks pretty good for something that was very challenging. So I hope that you like this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.